In the middle of the service, when the moment of the children's blessing arrived, they all ran to the front. The pastor smiled, placing his hand on the head of each one of them. But suddenly, he stopped in front of a boy only 8 years old. He withdrew his hand and said in a firm voice, "Not you, the child of a single mother, must first be purified." Silence filled the church. The child stood still, with tearful eyes, while his mother trembled on the pew, not knowing how to react. His heart seemed to race with every second, feeling the weight of the community's gaze. But why was he rejected in such a way? What could justify such humiliation? What happened next was even more painful and changed their lives forever. Comment: is this fair? I want to know your opinion. I always liked going to church. Since I was little, that place seemed magical to me, a simple and luminous refuge. The smell of the wooden pews, the cold floor, the choir rehearsing softly, everything calmed me down. My mother would wake me up early on Sundays, brew coffee, warm milk, prepare bread with butter, and adjust my white shirt. While tying my worn-out shoes, she would smile and say that God took care of us. I believed her. I wanted to learn to love, forgive, and have hope, exactly as she repeated. We walked together, slowly, to the corner where the bells rang. I counted the steps, trying to hold back the anxiety, imagining the stained glass glowing with sunlight. When the door opened, I breathed deeply, feeling an embrace of peace. The church seemed to recognize me, as if it whispered, "Here you belong, boy." I smiled, leaned on the front pew and gave thanks for one more calm Sunday there, with my mother. My mother was my safe harbor. She raised me alone, working as a seamstress in the cramped living room of our small apartment. The machine vibrated all night, scratching the table with tired movements, yet she listened to me patiently, corrected my homework, and laughed at my stories. On hard days, the smell of new fabric mixed with black coffee reminded me she never gave up on us. Sometimes her fingers bled, and I would blow gently, trying to heal them. She said every stitch was a prayer, every garment delivered an act of gratitude. Some people whispered about her, calling her a single mother with a heavy sigh. I didn't understand why that seemed to blame someone who loved me so much. When I felt sad, she would tuck my blanket, kiss my forehead, and say that God knew our truth, and that was enough. Then I smiled, hid stubborn tears, and promised to study, to help, to deserve that affection. Every day, at school, things were different. Some classmates asked about my father as if it were a math problem, expecting the right answer. I shrugged, said he worked far away, and changed the subject. There were days when I preferred playing alone, building castles out of bottle caps, pretending they were silent fortresses against questions. The teacher was kind, but sometimes her voice became too careful when speaking to me, as if I were glass. I just wanted to be a normal boy, to learn multiplication tables, draw crooked trees, run during recess. When someone laughed at my last name or made up nicknames, I counted to 10 in my head and breathed. At home, I hid the sadness so as not to add weight to my mother, keeping everything inside my chest. At night, I closed my eyes and prayed for courage, wishing to wake up invisible to mockery, but visible to joy so I could play without fear the next day. At church, I believed everything would be different. People sang together, and I felt the music hug me from within. The stained glass told stories of light, and I searched for a place for my name in them. I closed my eyes and asked for simple things, that my mother could rest, that the rent would fit in our pocket, that I would grow up good. Sometimes I imagined God descending slowly, sitting beside me, and telling me he was proud. I wanted to hear that out loud. When the sermon ended, I watched the pastor walk confidently, greeting everyone, and thought that he cared for me too. I was sure that God did not ask about absent fathers before loving a child. I pictured myself running in the courtyard afterward, laughing, collecting small blessings, keeping them like favorite stickers. There I imagined a peaceful tomorrow for the two of us, without fear of anyone. When the pastor announced the special prayer for children, I spent the whole week counting down the days. I woke up and marked a square in my notebook, as if protecting a precious secret. I practiced my posture, head bowed, hands together, eyes closed, heart open. My mother noticed my excitement and sewed a white shirt just for me, aligning every stitch as if embroidering hope. On Saturday, we polished my shoes together. I wanted everything to shine. Before sleeping, I repeated my prayer, that God would see me, that He would reach me too. I dreamed of bells, light, and peace. I woke up early, combed my hair, hugged my mother tightly, and we walked slowly, feeling the sun debut in the sky and the street awaken with us. Neighbors opened their windows, wished us good morning, and I answered with a smile, holding on to the secret of my request. Each step felt like a staircase of light rising slowly toward the long-awaited blessing. Amen. When the moment came, I ran with the other children to the front and joined the line. The pastor smiled, touched heads, pronounced beautiful words. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and repeated inside, I am here, God. I felt His presence approaching, the smell of perfume, the creak of the floor. I opened one eye, saw the raised hand, and closed it again. Then everything turned strange. The hand stopped in the air, slowly withdrew. Silence weighed like stone. I opened my eyes and met the pastor's stern gaze. He said clearly, without haste, not you. Then he declared that the child of a single mother needed to be purified first. I lost my breath, as if someone had blown out my flame. My hands sweated, my face burned, and my feet, glued to the ground, refused any escape, while blessings continued beside me. I felt thick eyes on my back, heavy, sharp, piercing the silence of a frightened small boy. I went back to the pew slowly, not knowing where to look. My mother pulled me to her chest, tried to hide my face in her embrace, as if she could shield me from the world. I trembled. She whispered that God loved me, that it would pass, that I was good. I wanted to believe her. But the phrase stuck like a thorn. Not you. While the hymns resumed, my hands still sweated and my knees knocked against each other. I wondered what I could have done wrong, but all I knew was to exist as a child. The service ended and some people whispered, others looked away. We left quickly. The sun seemed harsher, the street longer. At home, my mother made tea and silence. The cup trembled with me. I avoided the mirror, afraid of finding a guilt I didn't understand. I went to bed early, but the pillow grew wet. The words hurt like pebbles under my eyelids, scraping my boyish dreams. The next day, I went to school with short steps. I hoped no one had seen, but they had. At recess, a group began to point and laugh, repeating the pastor's words as a playground joke. I tried to ignore it, but the laughter stuck to my skin. I sat near the tree and counted ants, pretending to study science. When the bell rang, I went back to class with a tight throat, holding back tears. The teacher asked if I was okay. I said it was allergies. At night, I prayed softly, asking for a way to be invisible to mockery and visible to love. I asked God if He listened to children without blessing. I wanted to believe He did, even though my chest ached like never before. I stroked the sheet, counted slow breaths, and promised to be better, though I didn't know where I had gone wrong. Maybe the mistake was existing without a father, I thought, and that broke a little heart too much. At home, my mother noticed my silence and tried to cook hope inside a simple pot of rice. She sat with me at the table, held my small hands, and asked what I felt. I said little because I didn't want to hurt her with those harsh words. She apologized without guilt, and that hurt even more. She said some people confuse faith with judgment, and that Jesus had wide arms. I nodded, but my heart was a tangled ball of yarn. That Saturday, we heard the choir rehearsing in the distance, and the sound, once sweet, grew sharp. I wondered if I could ever enter the church again. I wondered if God still held my hand despite what was said. I wanted to believe, breathed deeply, and carried on. On Sunday, I put on my clothes, but stopped at the door, holding the doorknob as if holding a heavy secret. I went back to my room, hugged the pillow and prayed for courage, also asking for lightness for my mother. Even with so much weight, a part of me kept searching for small lights. I saw them when my mother laughed at simple things, when the wind moved the curtains, when the pot made funny noises on the stove. I looked at the sky and tried to find a sign, any sign, that I was still inside God's embrace. I decided to write my requests on a piece of paper: protection for my mother, strength to face laughter, peace to return to church. I kept the paper inside my children's Bible. I promised not to give up on love, even while feeling fear. That night, I fell asleep repeating that I was a son, and that could not be questioned. I didn't know, but something was about to change deeply. The first turn would come in the corridors of the very temple, where silence, courage, and truth would meet to open another door. I would follow small traces of kindness, and perhaps discover that God had never let me go. The week after the episode, I woke up with a heavy heart. The sun came through the window, but it lit nothing inside me. Every time I remembered the phrase, "not you," it felt like someone was drawing a red mark across my soul. My mother tried to cheer me up with pancakes, with soft music on the radio, but I ate in silence, staring at the plate. I didn't want her to notice how broken I was. Deep down, I was afraid her pain would be greater than mine, because I knew she blamed herself. So I hid it, smiling faintly, pretending everything was fine, but inside, it was as if a piece of my world had fallen and shattered into 1,000 fragments, and I didn't know how to put it back together again. At school, things became even harder. Some boys who had been at church started repeating the pastor's words as if they were a joke. They followed me around at recess, clapping their hands and saying, "Look, the unblessed kid, the child of a single mother." I tried to get away, hid behind the tree, pretended I was busy playing alone, but it hurt more than any slap ever could. I thought, if they are laughing, it's because they believe it's true, and if everyone believes it, then maybe it is. Was I different? Did God look at me with less love just because I didn't have a father? The doubt hurt like a thorn stuck in my chest, and there was no way to pull it out. My mother began to notice that I came home downcast every day. One day when I arrived, she knelt in front of me and held my face with both hands. "Son, look at me. You are loved. You are precious. God never rejects a child." I wanted to believe, but the pastor's voice still echoed inside me, louder than any comfort. I shook my head, trying to believe her words, but the tears escaped. She hugged me tightly, as if she wanted to stitch back together what was torn. In that embrace, I felt safe, but also afraid. Afraid that the world would keep telling me the opposite. Afraid that the rejection would become a shadow, following me forever, at every corner, in every sideways glance. The nights grew long. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my hands crossed over my chest. My prayers began to change. Before, I asked for simple things: good grades, health for my mother, to play without falling. After that day, my prayers became questions. God, do you hear me, even if the pastor doesn't want you to? Am I less your child because of my mother? Do you reject me too? I stayed silent, waiting for an answer that didn't come. The clock ticked, the wind moved the curtain, and I thought maybe the answer was the silence itself. That scared me. Sleeping became difficult, and when sleep finally came, heavy dreams followed, always the same scene. The pastor's hand pulling away, his voice saying, "Not you." The following Sunday, my mother asked if I wanted to go to church. I hesitated. My heart raced, just thinking about stepping into that place again. I shook my head slowly, and she respected it, though I saw sadness in her eyes. We stayed home. We heard the bells from afar, and each chime seemed to poke at my wound. I tried to distract myself with drawings, but I couldn't. I felt as though I was running away from a place where I should have been safe, was fleeing wrong. Did God feel sad with me for not having the courage to return? That confusion consumed me. I was only a child, but I was carrying a burden too heavy for my small shoulders. The faith that once gave me strength now seemed like a field full of doubts. My mother started taking me on small outings to try to cheer me up. We went to the square, bought cheap ice cream, sat on the bench to watch the pigeons. She told me funny stories from her childhood, as if she wanted to show me that you can always laugh, even in hard times. I laughed a little, but then silence came back. I watched the families passing by, father, mother, children holding hands. It hurt. I wondered, if my father were with me, would the pastor have blessed me? Would the children not have mocked me? Would my life have been different? That thought began to grow, and I began to feel a lack I hadn't felt before. Not the absence of my father, whom I never knew, but the absence of a piece of dignity that seemed stolen from me. At Sunday school, when I finally decided to return, I felt the stares weighing on me. Some teachers were kind, smiled more than usual, as if trying to make up for something, but others looked away, as if they didn't know where to place me. During the lesson, while they talked about love and forgiveness, I could only think of the contradiction. How could they speak of love and at the same time treat me as if I were a problem? My head filled with questions I didn't dare ask out loud. At the end of class, a lady said to another, "It's a pity, a child growing up like that without a father. It's not her fault, but still." I heard it, each word cut like a knife. I ran outside, sat on the step of the door, and cried in hiding. My mother, seeing me like that, decided to talk to me more directly. She sat by my side and said, "Son, the church is made of people. People fail. People judge, but God does not fail. He does not judge you for being my son. He made you the way you are, and that is beautiful." I looked at her, trying to believe. A part of me clung to her words like a castaway clings to a plank in the sea. But another part still heard the pastor's voice, repeating endlessly, "Not you." And that voice was like an echo that would not fade. Even so, that day I decided to hold my mother's hand and believe at least a little. Because if I gave up on believing, what would be left for me? As the days went by, I began to realize I wasn't alone. Some people in the community started approaching us. A neighbor brought cake, saying she admired my mother's strength. A friend at school defended me when others tried to mock me. These small gestures were like drops of hope falling into a dried-up heart. I began to see that even in so much injustice, there were still people able to see beyond prejudice. That gave me strength not to give up. I was still afraid, still cried in silence, still asked myself, why me? But little by little, I began to feel that maybe there was an answer hidden somewhere, an answer I didn't know yet, but that one day would appear. And so, even while carrying an open wound, I began to realize the story wasn't over yet. I didn't know it, but that episode would be only the beginning of a greater struggle, one that would shake not only me and my mother, but the entire community. The shame I felt that day was slowly beginning to transform into a mixture of pain and courage. And that mixture, I would soon discover, would become the fuel for a turning point no one expected. After that Sunday, I tried to believe that everything would go back to normal, but it didn't. The scene was not just a memory, it was a shadow stuck to my steps. When we returned to the church, I realized something had changed. It wasn't only my eyes, it was the eyes of others on me. They followed me with curiosity and judgment, as if I were an uncomfortable enigma. Some people whispered softly, and their words fell like invisible needles. Even the children who used to play with me began to avoid my presence. They no longer called me to run in the courtyard or to share stickers. I pretended not to care, but my heart tightened. It was as if suddenly I had lost the right to be just a child, light and smiling. I walked inward, seeking silence, and found a weight. Faith still whispered hope, but fear answered first, telling me I needed to learn to shrink. Even small, I became smaller inside. The pastor's first hints came early, like arrows disguised as doctrine. In the next sermon, he spoke about broken families and children without direction. He didn't mention my name, but I felt the aim. My mother noticed it too. Her hand trembled when she heard, "A child needs a father to be well guided." I wanted to disappear, sink between the pews, become mute wood. I bowed my head and prayed that no one would look at our row. They looked. It is impossible to hide a stone thrown from the pulpit. Each phrase of his was a brick, building a wall between me and the others. I asked silently if it was sincere conviction or a tool to hurt me. I sought shelter in the songs, but the choir seemed farther away. The notes passed over me like cold wind. When the service ended, I left quickly, but carried the sermon stuck to me. Words, when they hit a child, dry slowly like heavy paint on skin. They take a long time to truly fade. After each service, my mother tried to console me, reminding me that human words fail and God knows the truth. I listened, but I couldn't separate them. If the pastor spoke in God's name, did that mean God thought the same? This question grew inside me like a stubborn root. When adults nodded their heads, when they repeated phrases during the week, it all seemed like a stamp reinforcing the sentence. I walked down the street and felt the echo following me, invisible and loud. I tried to run from it, but the sound was trapped in my chest. I wanted to believe my mother, to hold on to her voice, but his authority weighed like a stone on my small shoulders. That's how doubt became a daily companion, sitting next to me at the table, at school, in bed. It was a constant presence whispering, "What if it's true?" I took a deep breath, counted steps, recited small psalms. Even so, the question returned, stubborn, every night. At Sunday school, the feeling of not belonging grew. During the activity about family, I shrank. The drawings of my classmates showed father, mother, and smiling siblings. Mine had only me and my mother holding hands. Some days, I pretended to have a stomachache to avoid the exercise. A certain teacher asked why I didn't draw my father. I stayed silent. The class laughed shortly, but laughed. That was enough. I ran, hid in the bathroom, washed my face until the water tired. Inside God's house, I was a reason for laughter, for simply existing differently. I went out to the courtyard, sat on the step and counted ants, trying to remember verses about love. The words looked beautiful on paper, but alive they hurt in my ear. I cried in silence, so no one would judge my crying. I returned to the room after a long time, sat in the back, breathed slowly, and promised to stay invisible until they said Amen at the end. My mother suffered along with me, even while trying to protect me with smiles. Her eyes turned red, and the silence at home grew like a wall. She sewed for hours, and sometimes I caught her staring into nothing, as if carrying an invisible weight. I wanted to comfort her, to say she wasn't guilty, that her courage was my shelter. I didn't know how. So I sat next to her, held her hand, and let the sound of the machine fill the spaces. The sound felt like a heartbeat, insisting on keeping everything alive. Every word from the pastor hit my mother too, and that hurt double. At night, I covered her with a sheet and a thank you. She smiled tiredly, and I promised to grow up good. I asked God for justice for the two of us. I placed my small hands on the fabric and asked for her rest. I promised to sweep, fetch water, organize threads. I wrote a note. "You are my courage, Mother." Little by little, the community began to treat us differently. Some neighbors stopped greeting us. Others shifted the conversation, as if closeness contaminated. A man said, half laughing, that nothing much could be expected from a boy without a father. I heard it secretly, but the phrase stuck. When I played in the street, certain mothers called their children inside, using rushed excuses. I didn't understand. I hadn't done anything. Even so, I was seen as danger, as an invented risk. I felt invisible and at the same time exposed. I started coming home earlier, head down, counting my steps. My mother asked if everything was fine. I said yes to spare her. At night, the pillow kept the rest. I cried softly, ashamed of crying. I asked heaven for a hug that would last until dawn. In the dream, someone welcomed me without questions, smiled, said my full name and blessed my small steps without demanding explanations or a father. Inside the church, the pastor's hints became more constant. He spoke about sin, order, consequence. He said adult choices poured pain onto children like a crooked inheritance. I understood the message. One Sunday he said, "God loves order. Breaking it produces suffering." The collective amen sounded heavy, like a seal. I felt they were pointing at me without saying my name. My mother squeezed my hand, trying to anchor me. I breathed short, holding back tears until it hurt. The hymns, once a refuge, became cold wind blowing in my chest. Each service turned into a silent marathon against the desire to disappear. I stayed still, counting screws on the ceiling, waiting for it to end. When the final blessing came, I left quickly, but carried nails in my heart. They didn't fall on the sidewalk. They came with me, piercing the entire path. At the gate I lowered my eyes, pretended to be in a hurry, and gave thanks for breathing. Then I remembered the next Sunday would come, and I feared greatly. Faith, once a refuge, began to mix with fear. Preparing for Sunday became a difficult task. My heart raced before we left, not with joy, but with anxiety. I wondered if there would be another hint, another crooked look, another silence. Even so, I didn't want to leave that place. It felt like betrayal to abandon the house where I learned to pray. I was stuck between two worlds. One said that God loved me without measure, the other swore I was unworthy. I was a child, but I knew a weight that many adults might not bear. I walked a tightrope between believing and shrinking. With each step, the rope creaked, asking for care. I looked at the stained glass, seeking my name in the light. I thought about baptism, soft songs, old embraces. I wanted to believe there was space for me. The memory of the pulpit pushed me back. I held my mother's hand. She said, "Stay." I stayed, trembling very much. At school, some of the pastor's phrases grew wings. Boys repeated that God didn't like children without a father, and laughed. I tried to ignore it, but each word marked my skin like a hot stamp. I began to avoid games. I became more alone. I walked with hunched shoulders, wanting to fit into any shadow. Teachers noticed, asked if I was okay. I almost told them, but I feared hearing agreement. I invented tiredness. Inside me, the truth was different. I was tired of existing as a living mistake. In the afternoon, I began to collect small, kind gestures, saving the day, a sincere good morning, a space on the bench, a piece of cake. When they appeared, I breathed better, as if opening a window in a stifling room. I wrote 3 sentences in a notebook to remember. I exist, I belong, I am loved. I repeated them softly during class, moving my lips. Sometimes it worked, other times it failed, but I kept repeating because repeating is also resisting. As the weeks went by, I felt something worse approaching. With each sermon, each whisper, each hidden laugh, the feeling grew. This wasn't a phase. It was the beginning of a storm. I couldn't explain it, but I felt it. I feared hearing my name said from the pulpit. I feared seeing my mother cry in public. I feared losing completely the desire to believe. Fear became an open umbrella inside the house, even when the sky seemed clear. I slept with shoes next to the bed like someone expecting to run. I prayed, asking for protection and courage, because I sensed the humiliation had not yet reached its limit. I imagined lightning cutting through the temple's roof, revealing hidden truths. I thought about asking for help, but didn't know who to turn to. Some smiled, others stayed silent, and silence also hurt. I wrote a note without an addressee, folded it, hid it in the children's Bible, and slept hugging it. I dreamed of wide arms embracing me. The following Sunday, I walked to church carrying invisible stones. Each step seemed to expose my presence like guilt that breathes. When we entered, the stairs were far too long, sharp, impatient with me. The pastor raised his voice about consequences inherited from parents. I trembled inside, nameless yet pointed to as the wrong example. The songs afterward felt like closed doors, and I only pretended to sing. My mother held my hand tightly, but I was alone. I felt a wall of silence surrounding our row, cruel, towering. We left in a hurry, like those fleeing a wind that still wounds. I returned home, counting my steps, carrying words like stones. In my room, I sat on the bed and contemplated my quiet doubts. I asked God for courage, but received silence as a heavy answer. I took 3 deep breaths, trying to hold tight to what remained. I promised not to cry in front of her, so as not to hurt her heart. I fell asleep, hearing distant footsteps, and in them I placed very small hope. The whispers became clear words, almost invitations to public humiliation. At the door, two women discussed examples, subtly pointing in our direction. "It's dangerous to bring children close," said one, looking down coldly. The other nodded, like someone signing documents. I stood motionless, trying to turn into a wall, wood, glass, anything. My mother breathed deeply, adjusted her purse, and we went on in silence. Outside, the sun seemed hard, striking at our wounds. She gave me a small smile, like someone calming an inner storm. I returned it with borrowed courage, pretending to hear nothing there. The road home felt long, full of invisible puddles. At the gate, she hugged me, and I felt her breathing short. I locked up my tears, but my eyelids burned with recent memories. I prepared 2 glasses of water, a ritual to keep us steady together. We sat at the small table, and silence filled the empty chairs. I wanted a ready-made solution, but found only breath for tomorrow. At school, exclusion gained choreography, always repeated at recess. When I approached, they got up quickly, taking their laughter with the balls. A boy shouted, "Don't touch it, or the ball gets cursed." The courtyard exploded in laughter, like cruel fireworks. I rose, holding back tears, like someone holding a storm under water. I ran to the bathroom, locked the door, and collapsed in silence. I wet my face, trying to erase phrases stuck painfully to my skin. When I returned, I said I was sick, and they left me alone. I ate in the corner, counting ants, inventing tasks to look busy. The whole afternoon weighed like a wet backpack, impossible to carry. I got home dragging my sneakers, trying not to cry again there. My mother noticed but didn't ask. She just made sweet tea. We drank slowly, like those learning to breathe after a wave. She said I was loved, and I wanted to believe it. Inside, it still hurt, like a hidden cut under clothing. At night, my prayers changed shape, growing into questions. I said, "God, do you hear me when I feel rejected? If I am your child, why do they deny me your blessing?" The silence answered slowly, hurting like a cold wind on the nape. I persisted, repeating old promises, trying to grasp any steady light. When sleep came, the phrase returned whole, "Not you." I woke up startled, chest aching, searching for air and immediate meaning. I turned on the light, counted steps, drank water, tried to rest again. I promised to write everything in a notebook so I would never go mad alone. I noted small requests, kind names, and weary surviving gratitudes. It was little, yet it held my faith like a thin, firm rope. I put the notebook in the drawer, like someone storing necessary medicine. I turned off the light, looked at the ceiling, and breathed deep and slow. I finally slept, tired, hugging the pillow like a small, faithful shield. I dreamed of wide arms welcoming me, saying my name without judgment. At the next service, the pastor spoke about children born in sin. He said they needed double discipline because they could easily get lost. I understood immediately. That speech lived at my address now. My mother squeezed my hand and her eyes glistened. Courage and sadness mixed, trying to protect me while everything hurt. I looked at the stained glass, searching for any hint of possible comfort. I saw beautiful light, but empty, unable to hold my weeping. I took a deep breath, counted to 10, and held back hot tears. When the Amen ended, we left in silence, like shadows crossing narrow corridors. At the gate, I heard my name whispered, mixed with pity and contempt. I pressed my lips together, kept walking, and pretended to notice nothing. At home, I washed my face, trying to remove dust from my chest. The water fell heavy, but cleansed less than I wanted. I sat on the bed, hugged my knees, and stayed very quiet. I asked heaven that the storm pass without further wounds. Over time, they treated my mother with a coolness that was almost polite. She always helped at events, sewed tablecloths, organized parties, prepared little favors. Suddenly no one asked, and they refused offers with frozen smiles. I watched her gaze wither slowly, like a flower without water. She pretended normalcy, brought the cloths back and gave a small smile. At night, she sewed silence, stitch by stitch, without complaining to me. I understood the invented guilt weighing on her, a hammer beating constantly. I hugged her tight, whispering that she was good, sufficient, whole, always. She smoothed my hair, promised to keep going, even tired, even sad. I made sweet tea, left it on the table, and waited with the silence. The steam rose slowly, drawing small clouds over our pain. Later, I wrote a note. "Your courage teaches me to breathe." She kept it in her pocket, squeezed it, and kissed my forehead. We slept late, but together, and that sustained my smaller heart. I woke stronger, willing to cross another hard day whole. My faith began to crack inside, like tense glass. I still prayed, but my words arrived without full conviction. I asked if God had secret rules, hard for children to understand. If the pastor studied so much, maybe that was it, I whispered. But the memory of him saying, "Not you," burned my trust. Without meaning to, I began to doubt everything that had felt safe. The children's Bible became a shelter, though a tender one with familiar pages. I read stories of welcome, trying to pace them over open wounds. Some scenes calmed me. Others, however, stirred bigger, harder questions. In the end, I closed the book and asked for a small sign. Maybe a sincere smile, a simple gesture, proof of belonging. I promised to keep insisting, because giving up would leave an even bigger emptiness in me. I held the paper of my requests and slept with it folded. I felt a bit of peace, though fragile like a thin shell. Tomorrow I would try again to believe that we fit inside love. In the following services, no one sat nearby. Empty rows surrounded our pew. It seemed we carried an invisible mark, dangerous, hard to touch there. I looked at the stained glass, trying to forget, but I remembered again and again. The music sang love, yet my skin heard insistent rejection. My hands sweated and my knees knocked when the sermon began. I counted tiles, like one who measures time so as not to cry. Some smiled from afar, others looked away, and many remained always silent. Silence also wounds, pierces slowly, and seems more respectable. I wanted to raise my hand and ask for an explanation, but I kept quiet. At the final amen, we left early, avoiding conversations, avoiding inquisitive eyes. At home, I drew a blue sky, wrote words, "I belong, I am loved." I stuck the paper on the wall, near the bed, reminding me of courage. When I looked at it, I breathed better, like a window opened after rain. I stayed there for a few minutes, letting my heart slow down, gratefully. I lay down and gave thanks for the small breaths that still sustained us. With time, the storm seemed to draw closer, sketching bigger clouds. The hints turned into hard certainties, almost accusations, even without names. I felt that soon they would call me by name in front of everyone. I imagined my mother crying, and my chest burned with fear. I thought of fleeing the church, but fleeing hurt too much the same. It was home, it was history, it was an old song living in me. I wanted clear answers, but received mute, insistent omens drawing near. I wrote another note, "Sustain us, God, before the bigger wave arrives." I folded the paper 3 times, kept it in the Bible, and waited. I left my shoes by the bed, ready to run early. I dreamed of a storm inside the temple, thunder revealing hidden secrets. I woke up sweaty, sat up slowly, and drank water in deep silence. The dawn stretched long, carrying away any possible rest of mine. When morning came, I knew the tide would rise higher today. I took a deep breath, held her hand, and said courage together. At the children's choir rehearsal, they called the kids to the front. I stood still, torn between stepping forward and fleeing the entire hall. The pastor observed, scratched his chin, and walked slowly closer. Silence spread, like fine dust, covering pews and tense breaths. I felt that this would be the hardest moment I had lived. My mother stood up, ready to intercede, but she too remained still. Some people leaned in to see, curiosity mixed with cold judgment. I felt my heart pound loudly, like a drum announcing a coming battle. I closed my eyes and asked for protection. Small, urgent hole now. When I opened them, I saw his lips move, preparing a sentence. The air grew heavy, and no one dared cough or whisper. My whole body trembled, but I stood firm, remembering my notes. If humiliation came, I wanted to survive, holding her hand. I touched my fingers to hers and felt true shared courage. Then he drew near the microphone, breathed, and called my name. At the next service, I woke up with a knot in my throat. I knew it would not be just any day. My mother tried to cheer me up, preparing coffee and warm bread, but my mind was already far away, imagining the words I would hear later. As we walked to the church, my heart pounded like a hurried drum. The streets seemed longer, as if pushing me backward. When we entered, I noticed the pews were full, but around us there was plenty of empty space. It was as if people had silently agreed to surround us with emptiness. I sat down, fidgeting nervously with my fingers, unable to focus on the hymns. My mother sang softly, trying to stay firm, but I knew she also felt the weight of what was to come. Something inside me screamed that day the storm would finally arrive. When the pastor began to preach, the feeling was confirmed. He spoke firmly about purity and inherited stains. His eyes scanned the temple, but when they stopped on me, I felt that the blade of his sermon had found its perfect target. He said, "Some, even among us, must be reminded that the house of God is a holy place, not a space for those who carry the marks of sin." My chest tightened. Every word of his sounded like a personal sentence. The silence of the church only made the phrases echo louder. I felt as if everyone was looking at me, even if they didn't turn their faces. I bowed my head, but it didn't extinguish the fire burning in my cheeks. The pew felt too hard, and my legs trembled non-stop. In the middle of the message, he asked the children to come forward. My heart nearly stopped. I knew what was about to happen. Still, I obeyed, because part of me hoped that this time it would be different. I walked with short steps, feeling the ground shake beneath my feet. We lined up just like before. His hands passed from head to head until he reached me. This time there was no brief pause. He stopped completely and stared at me. The entire church noticed. "You still cannot receive this blessing," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "As long as there is no repentance and order, God is not pleased." My heart collapsed. The phrase sounded like a locked door before me. And this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was public before everyone. The children beside me looked confused. Some laughed nervously. I felt my whole body wanted to disappear. Behind me, adults murmured, and some nodded their heads. The worst was hearing a boy whisper, "It's him, the one who can't be blessed." The soft laughter that followed cut like a knife. I wanted to run, but my legs would not obey. I stood still, with tears burning in my eyes. I looked at my mother and saw that she tried to stand, but someone held her arm, asking her to remain quiet. That hurt even more. My mother, who had always been my shield, was prevented from defending me. I was alone, exposed, too small before a sea of judgments. The pastor went on blessing the others, as if nothing had happened. I dragged my feet back to the pew, trying to hold back my tears. My mother embraced me immediately, but I couldn't feel protected. The pastor's words echoed non-stop inside me. It was as if each repetition was a hammer striking my chest. "Not you, not you, not you." I wanted to believe that God loved me, but how could I believe if his representative before everyone rejected me? My mother whispered in my ear, "Son, God is greater than men." But what I felt was that everyone agreed with that man. The music started again, but I couldn't sing. My lips moved without sound. My heart was too heavy, crushed by shame. I had never felt so alone. In the following days, the scene spread. At school, it didn't take long for classmates to comment. "The boy who can't be blessed," they repeated, laughing. It was as if it had become a nickname. Some began to avoid me even more, as if I truly were someone wrong. I started walking alone through the hallways, carrying books like a shield. The teachers noticed my silence, but asked nothing. Perhaps they didn't want to get involved. My mother did everything she could to cheer me at home. She prepared simple sweets, told stories from her childhood, but I stayed quiet. I smiled so as not to make her sad, but inside, the hole only grew. The pastor's phrase repeated in my mind, even when I tried to sleep. At night I woke up several times, sweaty, as if falling into a bottomless pit. Faith, which had once been my shelter, began to shatter. I still prayed, but my words were filled with pain. God, do you hear me? Or do you also reject me? The silence was cruel. The dark room felt larger, and I felt too small. Sometimes I hugged my pillow as if it was someone who could hold me. The image of the pastor pulling back his hand came to my mind like a repeated film, and I thought, maybe it's true, maybe I don't deserve God's love. The doubt was like poison running through my veins, slow but constant. I wanted to scream, to ask for answers, but all I could do was cry softly so as not to wake my mother. She already carried so much weight that I didn't want to add more tears to hers. On the street, the neighbors began to speak openly. One of them said, "It's consequence. No one escapes. It's harsh, but it's God's law." I heard it behind the gate and ran inside, heart racing. Every word from people seemed to confirm the rejection. I no longer knew whom to trust. Did everyone think like that? Would my whole life be marked by something I didn't choose? I was only 8 years old, but I already carried questions that felt too big for me. My mother hugged me every time she saw me sad, but I noticed that she too was falling apart. At night she cried softly, thinking I was asleep. I pretended not to hear, but every sob of hers was like a mirror of my pain. We were trapped in the same net of suffering. Over time, I began avoiding even the few friends I had left. I didn't want them to drift away from me too, because of all this. I preferred to isolate myself rather than be rejected again. I started spending more time drawing in silence, inventing worlds where children were accepted just as they were. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, the memory always returned. The pastor's voice would not leave my mind. I dreamed of it, woke up with it, lived with it. My body began to react. I had no appetite, didn't want to play, just stayed quiet. My mother tried to take me outside, but I made up excuses. I felt ashamed even to be seen. It was as if my very existence were a mistake, and that thought began to grow inside me, suffocating any joy. It was at that point I realized the storm had not ended yet. Each time the pastor spoke, each time people repeated his words, it was as if they were preparing the ground for something even greater. I didn't know what it would be, but I felt that my name, soon, would be spoken even more clearly before everyone. Fear grew inside me like a wave about to break. I was only 8 years old, but I already knew the worst was yet to come. And that feeling accompanied me in every step, in every breath. Life was no longer just living. It was waiting for the next blow. When he called my name on the microphone, I felt the world shrink. My body became light and heavy at the same time, as if I were a balloon held by a short string. I stood up slowly, hearing the pew creak, and walked down the aisle between eyes I didn't want to meet. The pastor waited for me with a serious expression, Bible open, his hand raised not in blessing but as a barrier. "Today, before the church, we need to correct what is crooked," he said, and the sentence cut like a blade. I looked at my mother. She tried to stand. Someone held her arm. I felt my heart run far away, but my legs kept moving forward. I wanted to say that I only wanted God, nothing more, and even that seemed too much. I stopped one step from the pulpit. The microphone hissed. The pastor drew a deep breath. The temple held its air, and I, small, waited for the sentence. He began to speak of order, of purity, of discipline for children born in contexts of sin, and each word pushed me to the edge of something dark. "It's not your fault, boy," he said loudly, "but there are paths that require correction before blessing." I felt my legs tremble. I thought of running, but I had run so many times inside that I stayed. Behind me, a lady murmured an uncertain "Amen," and the sound echoed like a wrong step on a staircase. The pastor raised the Bible, opened to difficult texts, repeated expressions I didn't understand, but the meaning was clear. I was the proof of disorder. Every second stretched the humiliation. My hands sweated. I tried to hide them in my pockets and couldn't. I looked at the choir and saw closed mouths. A child whispered my wounded nickname. The wood of the pulpit seemed like a mountain, and the church, a room with no windows. My mother rose with an impulse that seemed to break chains. "Enough," she said, and her voice cut the air like a bell that demands attention. Many turned their gaze between irritation and surprise. The pastor tilted the microphone away from her, leaving her outside the sound, but her courage crossed without an amplifier. "He is my son. He is not a mistake. God does not reject him." I felt my chest open a little, as if I could finally breathe. Someone beside her tried to pull her back to the pew. She held firm. The pastor cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the scene. "Sister, wait your turn. There is order in worship." My mother lifted her head. "Then do justice now." There was a buzz of voices, a whirlwind of whispers. I looked at the floor and saw my tears fall like small confessions no one wanted to hear. An elder with white hair stood slowly, leaning on the railing of the center aisle. He had always been discreet, almost invisible, like stained glass when the sun hides. He asked to speak with his hand raised. The pastor hesitated, perhaps fearing to lose the thread of his discourse, but the congregation yielded space to silence. The elder came close, opened a small, worn Bible and read, "Let the little children come to me. Do not hinder them." The phrase fell like water on cracked ground. "There is no footnote or exception for the mother's marital status," he added, with a gentle, steady voice. I felt my body shudder with relief and fear at the same time. The pastor pressed his lips together, straightened his tie. The elder did not raise his tone. He simply held up the light of that line. And for an instant the church seemed to listen with its heart. The pastor resumed, "Scripture does not contradict itself. Holiness is required." The elder, still gentle, replied, "Holiness is separation from sin, not separation from the child." The air grew dense. A man in the middle shouted, "Amen!" Another retorted, "Respect the pastor!" The temple turned into a sea rolling without warning. I, at the center, felt the tide carry me back and forth. My mother held my hand. "I'm here," she whispered, and my soul clung to that anchor. The pastor asked for order. "We're straying from the focus," he said, trying to wrap the conversation in authority. Then, as if mustering all his strength, he pointed at me. "This boy needs to understand there are steps before the table." The word boy sounded small for the size of the weight they wanted to set on my shoulders. I breathed, closed my eyes, and asked God for a thread of voice. I opened my mouth afraid nothing would come out, but it did, trembling and whole. "I only want God." My voice echoed without a microphone, and even so I heard it inside me like a timid thunder. I didn't choose my father. I chose to love God with my mother. There was a shock in the air, like when a glass falls and no one decides who will clean it up. The pastor tried to interrupt. "That's not," but I stopped being afraid of the sound that I was. "If God said not to hinder the children, why are you hindering me?" I felt my legs steady a little. My mother squeezed my hand once, slowly, as if to say, "Go on." The elder nodded, eyes brimming. Some people lowered their heads, others turned their eyes away, unsettled. The pulpit microphone hissed and died, and for a moment even the air stopped hurting. It was then that a woman from the choir, until then silent, took a step forward. She held a score, her hands trembling. "Pastor, with respect, I was also raised only by my mother." The silence changed color. "I received the blessing here when I was younger than he is." She looked at me with tenderness, like one who recognizes an old scar on another's skin. God did not weigh my head because of my father. The pastor closed his eyes for an instant, calculating roots. "Sister, each case, each child," she corrected, with the humble courage of one who can only tell the truth she lived. The whole choir hung suspended, like a note that doesn't resolve. I felt a small flame light in my chest. It wasn't victory. It was breath. Sometimes the miracle begins only as space to breathe. The pastor, perhaps sensing the tide turning, changed the plan. "Boy, bring your mother. We will pray for purification." The word bit. But my mother looked at the elder. He shook his head, as if to say, "Do not accept the guilt that isn't yours." I held my words, afraid I would spit out pain. "I am not dirt," I said softly. "I am a son." The church swayed between sighs and indignation. The pastor called 2 deacons. Their steps sounded like hammers on the floor. The elder raised his hand again. "Do not touch." There was a gentle authority there that asked no permission. It simply existed. If there is to be prayer, let it be of welcome, not of shame. A child in the choir, not understanding everything, simply repeated, "Welcome." And the word, light and alive, circled the temple like a bird seeking an open window. I felt such a great weariness that my legs went weak. The world spun a little, like when you stand up too fast. My mother held me up, her hands turning into solid ground. I rested my forehead on her shoulder and let 2 tears finally fall without resistance. The elder came closer. He did not touch me, but stood within comforting distance. "Son, you are not alone," he said, like one who announces the obvious we forget. The pastor breathed hard, between irritation and calculation. "We're going to end the service," he decreed, and the haste of order sounded like disguised defeat. The congregation didn't know whether to sing, to leave, to think. The organist played 2 lost notes. I just wanted to go away, but something inside me asked, "Don't end it like this," with the silence of an open wound. I gathered courage and looked at the microphone. It was tilted to the side, silent as if it had given up its own voice. I didn't need it. "I forgive," I said, and the floor seemed to vibrate a little. My mother looked at me, startled, as if afraid I was yielding to the wrong weight. "I forgive because I don't want to carry a stone in my chest," I continued, "but I do not accept being treated as less." The elder wept discreetly. The woman from the choir pressed the score to her heart. The pastor clenched his jaw. I didn't see repentance, only disconcert. "I will come back if they let me be a child. If not, God will find me outside." My voice faltered at the end, but it stood. The temple, for a second, seemed to return a different echo. Not you, but you are. I left through the side with my mother, our fingers still interlaced, feeling that something had broken and something else had been born in the same place. Outside, the sun seemed less harsh. The elder came slowly into the courtyard, stopped 2 steps away and smiled. "God does not unlearn how to love," he said, like one offering warm bread. The woman from the choir stayed at the door, like a guardian of a story she knew from the inside. Behind us, the murmur continued, choices forming, fears trying to become certainties. I took a deep breath and put in my pocket the note I had written. "Sustain us, God," before the bigger wave. Now I knew. The wave had already struck, but I was standing. It still hurt, of course, but there was a fire lit, and when a flame withstands the gale, the night learns to respect it. The rest I would discover with the next step. The news of that service spread through the city like hot wind. It was not just another Sunday. It was a cut that left visible marks. Some said it was necessary, order must exist. Others responded, a child must never be exposed. At every corner there were versions, rumors, fragile certainties, yet almost everyone repeated the same phrase, as if discovering water in the desert. "I only want God." People who weren't even there swore they had heard the echo of that phrase crossing doors, windows, markets, plans. It stuck in the community's memory like the smell of freshly baked bread, simple, firm, impossible to ignore. Since then, eyes stopped slipping away and began to face forgotten questions, especially about what purity really means when speaking of the heart of a wounded boy before the altar, pressured by adults who feared making mistakes, but made them anyway. The case became a mirror, showing faith, pride, courage, and shame. In the small house, mother and son tried to breathe after the storm. The boy clutched the prayer notebook, now stained by stubborn tears. He didn't say much. His head rested on her shoulder, while the clock stuttered long seconds. The mother felt pride in his courage and pain at seeing him carry grown-up burdens so early. She ran her hand through his hair, murmured, "God knows your heart," and waited. Silence answered with a short but real peace. She made tea, shared bread, opened the window. The wind brought the smell of the street, and with it a trace of hope. Before sleeping, he wrote slowly, "I don't need to prove anything to anyone." The mother read, closed her eyes tight, and thanked quietly. That night, they both dreamed of wide arms embracing their fears and woke up less alone, though the world remained harsh, demanding, noisy. They decided to walk together, step by step, until light returned. Inside the church, the air seemed split in two. Believers sought the pastor demanding explanations, and he answered with firm terms, texts, doctrines, fences. Many listened respectfully, but left with open questions. The white-haired elder, discreet, became a reference. People sought his counsel, and he gently repeated, "Do not hinder the children." The words were bridge, not wall. One group organized a circle to talk about welcome, another prepared letters to the council, requesting a review of practices. There were hands ready to work for healing, and there were crossed arms defending old discipline. The next service arrived tense, rigid smiles, empty rows around the mother, looks heavier than pews. At the exit, no one planned it, but two invisible lines emerged, separating those who wanted to listen from those who preferred to judge quickly. It was a clear crack, splitting friendships, dinners, choirs, reminding that faith without mercy becomes rule without God, cold, empty. In the neighborhood, small gestures began to bloom like flowers after rain. A lady brought cake, left a note saying, "Courage." A young man asked the boys forgiveness for laughing. He heard an answer he did not expect. "I was also wrong when I believed I was alone." The phrase circled streets, markets, corridors, revealing a lesson no sermon contained. Other hands came with groceries, blankets, offers of work for the mother. The boy smiled again, short but sincere. He wrote in his notebook, "Thank you for the light that arrived slowly." The news of the gestures calmed some hearts, irritated others. "That's weakness," some said. "That's the gospel," others answered. The city learned that public care also exposes private wounds, and that repair begins in everyday life. Open doors, attentive ears, steps willing to walk with those hurt in the public square. Because justice is not just a sentence, it is a path, day after day, with hands, bread, tenderness, patience, memory, truth, and humble constancy. The pastor felt the weight reach his office. He was used to firm certainties, but now received questions that could not be resolved with ready-made phrases. His justifications, once indisputable, began to sound harsh, metallic. Some supported him out of loyalty. Others asked for review, for listening, for pause. At night, he opened the Bible, reread stories of encounters where children stood at the center. There was a new discomfort, like a stone in his shoe. He thought of the phrase, "I only want God," and realized that perhaps the purity demanded was less about rules and more about outstretched hands. He did not yield publicly yet, but his silence grew, lengthening the pauses before each sentence. And an honest pause already begins to change discourses, because it lets God speak first, at least a little. The next morning, he walked alone to the temple, sat, looked at the pews, and asked for wisdom, mercy, humility, courage, and possible repair for all. The mother, still wounded, began to notice she was not alone. People who once watched from afar approached, offering rides, orders, listening, time. A woman brought a new blanket and said, "You have taught us more with courage than many sermons." She smiled unhurriedly, kept the compliment as one keeps water during drought. At the table, the boy wrote, "I am not alone," and stuck the phrase to the wall. The house poor seemed to grow a little, as if it gained new rooms made of affection. At night, the mother reread the month's bills, calculated possibilities, sighed deeply, and thanked for the small doors that opened. It was not a noisy miracle, but it was relief enough to keep going, sowing, while life retaught forgotten kindnesses, erased by the haste of public judgment. In the end, she closed her eyes and asked for a chance to rebuild trust, without revenge, without bitterness, with justice, respect, memory, and peace. At school, the tide began to turn quietly. Teachers heard about the episode and decided to talk with the class. "No one chooses where they are born, but everyone deserves respect," said the teacher, erasing laughs that once sounded unchecked. The boy listened quietly and felt his pain had gained a name on the blackboard. Some classmates came closer, offered a place in soccer, shared lunch. Others stayed harsh, but they were no longer the majority. He went back to drawing, now including a big table with many friends and a mother laughing beside him. The drawing stayed on the mural, coloring a hallway that once felt narrow. Passing there, he repeated softly, "I belong, I belong, I belong." It was not a mantra, it was new breath, insistent, stubborn, saving. Little by little, school ceased to be a battlefield and became ground for restart, where small kindnesses trained hearts to recognize dignity without adjectives, without exceptions, without delay, and without fear. The white-haired elder knocked at the door on a gentle afternoon, carrying a worn Bible with underlined lines. "I came to remind you that God does not distance himself from the little ones," he said, sitting without hurry. The boy flipped through the pages, smelled the old paper, and smiled. Beside him, the mother listened to stories of people welcomed when no one wanted to come close. At the end, the elder asked permission to pray. He did not ask for purification, but for comfort, courage, rest, and paths. As he stood up, he left a short hug, one of those that say much without words. When he left, the house felt lighter. The boy slept with the Bible on his chest and dreamed of windows opening inside, as if his heart had found new doors to breathe. The next morning, he copied short verses, taped them beside the drawing, and wrote, "Love does not delay." The wall became a map, reminding roots back when pain tried to rule. Despite the gestures, there were those who would not yield. They repeated, "Order must be maintained," and used that shield to avoid questions. The pastor still had loyal allies, and the crack divided pews, tables, friendships. The community became a mirror, showing both the best and the worst: mercy, fear, courage, pride, stubbornness, learning. The mother chose not to argue in the square. She saved her energy to care for her son and pay the bills. The boy practiced another discipline, rising slowly, resisting without turning to stone, thanking for small miracles. And when he remembered the pulpit, he no longer heard, "Not you." He heard, "You are," whispered softly by his renewed heart. Not everyone accepted, but some were enough to sustain a possible future, less narrow, more human, more faithful. Because change rarely begins with applause. It begins with a few who decide to love despite the cost, and keep going day by day until the rest discover they too can learn to do the same. Among so many words, one image remained that no one could erase. The boy, small, saying, "I only want God," and then adding, "I forgive," without accepting guilt that was not his. The phrase "light" crossed doors, plates, agendas, and became seed. It grew in some hearts, broke the crust in others, and unsettled those who preferred the comfort of rules without people. No one knew how to measure results, but all realized that something had changed. The future had not arrived yet, but it was already moving silently inside each conscience. And when the city repeated the story, it ended up confessing quietly that purity without mercy is a showcase, while love with courage is path, ground, home. Thus, little by little, resolution began before the public apology. It began in practice, with eyes learning to welcome, with hands blessing again, and with a boy who kept breathing hope beside his present mother. As the days went by, the memory of that service did not fade. It remained alive in simple conversations, in church hallways and at dinner tables. Every Sunday arrived surrounded by caution, as if everyone were walking on glass. Some avoided the subject to keep from fighting. Others repeated aloud the same question: how can we sing about love and deny welcome to a child? No one had an easy answer. The pastor's authority still existed, but his voice no longer sounded singular. The boy had no microphone, position, or pulpit. Even so, his short phrase kept preaching non-stop, inside and outside the temple. I only want God. That simplicity toppled defenses, lit up dark corners, exposed fears, and before it, long sermons seemed small. What remained was to face the open wound, accept that there was abuse, and decide what kind of community they wanted to be from then on. Because love without courage becomes a cold rule, with no life at all. The mother kept steady in silence, gathering strength in small gestures. She sewed orders, swept the house, boiled water, and slowly collected hope with patience. Each stitch of the needle told her son, "We go on." At night, they read together the verses the elder had marked. He read slowly, savoring the words, like someone chewing warm bread. Those ancient pages seemed new, because now they spoke directly to the wound. The boy still carried fear, but he began to walk more upright. He discovered that courage is not the absence of tremor, it is remaining standing while the heart sways. He went back to drawing, sticking phrases on the wall, reminding himself that he belongs. He slept, hugging the worn Bible, breathing better. At breakfast, the mother kissed his forehead and repeated that dignity does not depend on others' approval. They still felt the city divided, but they already knew where to seek shelter, in God's arms and in friendly hands whenever they needed them. In the church, the pressure rose like the tide. Families tired of rigidity began gathering in homes, reading the Bible with welcome and honest questions. They were not rebels. They were people hungry for mercy. The pastor found out and felt his influence wane. He tried to respond with harsher sermons, longer, full of borders. But the image of the rejected boy remained before everyone, like an uncomfortable mirror. Every phrase spoken from the pulpit was measured by the ancient simplicity, "I only want God," and any explanation that wounded that truth sounded empty. The council met, discussed for hours, and realized that the body's unity had visible cracks. The elder insisted on the same gentle line: welcoming does not deny holiness, it reveals holiness. Some agreed, others sighed. No one could unsee what they had seen. The wound required public repair, not just private conversations. Time demanded a clear, humble, responsible, and feasible response to heal the wounded flock. In the neighborhood, signs of change became more visible. People who once averted their eyes began to greet, to offer help, to truly ask how they were. A young man apologized to the boy for having laughed at him. He received a timid smile and an answer that taught, "It's all right." The mother watched from a distance and realized that the pain had produced early maturity, but also a surprising tenderness. He had learned that courage does not always shout. Many times it simply remains. He started playing soccer again, slowly, testing trust. Some classmates joined him, others stayed away. The world did not change entirely, but a passage already existed. At home, the wall remained covered with short phrases: "I belong, I am loved, I am not alone." When she read them, the mother's heart rested a little, because each word written there was a concrete reminder of a promise that no one could rip out, distort, or delay indefinitely, even in the face of stubborn resistance. The pastor, pressured from within and without, called a special service. He arrived with a lower voice, longer pauses, and a folded paper. He looked at the church and said he had been wrong in how he handled the situation. He did not explain everything, did not delve into theologies. He simply acknowledged that he had wounded. It was not a perfect confession, but it opened a path. Some applauded, others crossed their arms. The boy stood beside his mother, listening calmly, like someone who doesn't want to miss any detail. He felt surprise and relief together. He knew that public words carry weight, and that the beginning of repair started there. The elder thanked God for the first step. From the pulpit, he asked the community to choose to welcome without delay. The air grew dense, but tender. The city understood that something had changed, even if discreetly, like a candle lit in a large hall, insisting against the darkness, and it called others to follow that light. After that, they organized a children's gathering with no hidden restrictions. Games, simple songs, final prayer. When it was time for the blessing, the elder invited the boy and his mother to stand in the center. He placed his hand on the boy's head and said, in a clear voice, "This is a beloved son." No exceptions, no delays. The silence became whole, reverent. Many wept. It was not a spectacle, it was public repair. The mother hugged her son with tears of relief. The boy closed his eyes, received and smiled. That scene entered the community's memory as a late but true response. There, the denied dignity was acknowledged before everyone. It did not erase wounds, but it began to heal. The pastor watched in silence, with a serious, tired face. Perhaps he was learning, slowly. The congregation breathed a little easier, like those who open windows after weeks of closed rooms, and they let in new light, simple, necessary, for all. Outside the temple, the story took on a life of its own. Families talked about it over lunch. Teachers cited it in lessons about respect. Neighbors corrected harsh manners. No one could measure the results, but everyone noticed discreet changes. Some said they would never again watch in silence when a child was humiliated. Others acknowledged their own cowardice, promising to learn to raise their voices. The boy walked through the market and received different smiles, less curious, more sincere. The mother continued her work, now with new orders and gentle conversations. It was not perfection, there were still grumblers. But the city seemed to have understood something essential. Power errs, innocence reveals paths. And when truth speaks softly, the hardest heart must decide whether to remain stone or learn to beat again. That decision began visiting every home, reminding that justice needs practice, not only pretty speeches, on the ground of life, every day. With time, life resumed a certain normality. The boy studied, played, helped at home. The mother served customers and organized bills. The scars did not disappear, but became reminders. When someone tried to justify harshness with doctrine, there was always someone to ask, "Where is the child in that rule?" The church, once split in two, began to rebuild on humbler foundations. The pastor kept his position, but learned to listen slowly. They created a group to welcome families in different realities, without humiliating labels. The elder remained steady, reminding that holiness loves. In services, the children's blessing returned to being just blessing, with no hidden gates. Some people left the congregation, others arrived. The essential remained. The reminder that love without courage becomes a showcase, and that courage without love becomes a hammer. They chose a path again and decided to walk together, with less fear, more listening, more patience, more justice, more life. Among all the phrases, one kept guiding decisions and conversations. "I only want God." It came to mind whenever the temptation to judge appeared. Before it, masks fell, justifications lost their shine, and the concrete person returned to the center. The city learned that purity without mercy does not heal, and that mercy without truth does not transform. The mother, watching her son sleep, understood that dignity does not depend on perfect biographies. The pastor, remembering the elder's silence, began to practice pauses before each sentence. The boy, now taller, learned to smile without apologizing. He did not desire a stage, he desired peace. And the church, still human and flawed, decided to protect the little ones as its first task. Because the gospel loses the road when it forgets childhood. They chose to remember. And in that remembrance, they found a new possible beginning, made of gestures, listening, repairs, memory, forgiveness, commitment, truth. Bread embraces a path, common for all. Now, the story no longer belongs only to that street. It belongs to each person who heard, reflected, and needed to decide which side they would stand on. Faced with an exposed child, who would you be? The elder who stands gently, the mother who protects with courage, the neighbor who finally asks forgiveness, the believer who prefers to be silent out of fear, the pastor who learns to pause and review. There is no neutrality before what wounds the little ones. There is always a possible gesture. The city understood this late, but it understood. And you who have come this far, what would you do? If you were on the pew beside them, would you stay seated or walk to the center? If you had a microphone, would you use it to judge or to welcome, comment, justice or abuse? Your word can open paths, because love, to be true, needs to act, and each sincere comment teaches the city to choose to care better for its little ones.